Andrew Jackson is certainly among our most famous presidents, but why? Why does he matter? Why do we care? Why is he so remembered? Well, he's remembered mostly for his association with democracy. Not only the Democratic Party, which he founded, but I mean more specifically democracy in the sense of putting more power in the hands of more people. In 1829, when Andrew Jackson is inaugurated as president, he invites everyone who's there back to the White House for a party. Now, in the eyes of Jacksonians, in the eyes of his supporters, this is this wonderfully beautiful democratic thing where not just rich and powerful people are invited into the White House, but the common man is. Of course, in the eyes of his opponents, they call this king mob. And they spread rumors that the White House has been trashed and all the food had been eaten and all the liquor had been drinking and people wouldn't leave for several days, which apparently there was some truth to. But how you viewed this as unruly people who don't belong in the White House or as a beautiful democratic thing where regular people finally get in kind of said a lot about whether or not you're going to be a Jacksonian Democrat or his opposition, which will kind of be called the Whigs. Politics will begin to open up to everyone. But when I say everyone, of course, I mean white men. And so we call this the era of the common man. Before 1820, most states have property or tax-paying requirements to vote. But Ohio, looking to try to encourage settlers to move west, will pass what they call universal suffrage laws. Again, universal means all white men. Other western states will follow, and pretty soon eastern states will start expanding voting rights to try to prevent people from leaving them and going west. Rhode Island was the least democratic state at this point. Fewer than half of its white males could vote. And in 1840, a man named Dorr led an effort to draft a new constitution. He put together a vote and had people vote on it, and it passed. It got a majority of support. The problem is he did all this without the support of the current government, and so Rhode Island effectively had two constitutions. The original government of Rhode Island arrested Dorr as a rebel, threw him in jail, but the political pressure was so great to expand suffrage, Dorr ended up getting his way in the end anyways. Even Rhode Island expanded the right to vote. Women could not vote anywhere, and very few northern states would allow a free black man to vote. Of course, slaves couldn't vote anywhere. Another thing to understand about elections at this time is that there's no secret ballot. You walk in and you publicly say who you're going to vote for, and there are going to be people from both sides writing down who you vote for, and so you're being held accountable for your vote. So just talking about the vote for president, we'll come back to Martin Van Buren in a minute. In 1800, originally the states chose the electors who would go to the electoral college who would pick the president, because the president's picked by this thing called the electoral college. By 1800, 6 states are letting voters vote on who the state will support in the electoral college. By 1828, every state but South Carolina is letting voters pick who's going to vote for president. In 1824, 27% of white men were able to vote for the president. In 1828, 58% of white men voted. And in 1840, 80% of white men voted. And so Jackson is associated with this turning over of elections, particularly the election of the president, from the state legislatures, the powerful, the elites, to regular people like we do it today. After the War of 1812, a New Yorker named Martin Van Buren argues that political parties are a good thing. Remember, our founding fathers thought they were the worst thing in the world. But he says that New York State has been controlled for so long by the Clinton family, they were basically monarchs. They were basically the kings of New York. He said they were aristocrats, and he said the only way to beat them is to organize against them. And Van Buren argues that what New York needs is a organized effort of regular people to throw out the aristocrats, who are the Clintons. He argues that a two-party system is good. He says in a two-party system, it's kind of like competition in anything. If one party is not giving the people what they want, the other party can come in, offer them what they want, and they'll win the election. And he says the two parties will keep everybody in check. So if you wander too far away from the will of the people, then the other party will gain power, you'll lose power, and that will give you an incentive to cater to the will of the people. He has great success in New York and manages to turn New York to the Democratic Party that he builds there. The Andrew Jackson-John Quincy Adams split in 1824, the corrupt bargain election, will take this ideal to a national level. Remember, for a little while there, we only had one party. But Van Buren actually argues that we need to have a second party. And so those who support Jackson will come to be called Democrats, and those who oppose Jackson will call themselves Whigs. Why Whigs? Well, Whigs is the traditional name of the party that opposed the King of England back in England. Since Jackson's opponent's big claim was that Jackson was acting like a king, King Andrew I, they called him, they styled themselves as the Whigs, as the opposition to the king. So who was Andrew Jackson, and what did he mean with all this common man stuff? Well, as you know, Jackson, as we talked about in class and in other videos, Jackson actually came from a fairly humble background. By the end of the Revolutionary War, he had lost his entire family, and he would eventually go on and marry a woman whose family had some money, Rachel Jackson. But remember, of course, she had been married before, and so we had the whole thing with her being called an adulterer. Jackson was a wild man. He was uncontrollable. He had raised his own army and fought in the War of 1812 and won the Battle of New Orleans. He had stolen Florida from Spain, and he had spent a good chunk of his life going to war against Native Americans. What he meant when he talked about the common man was that the government should offer equal protection and equal benefits to all white men, regardless of their class or their region. So whether you were born poor or rich, whether you were from the west or the east, the north or the south, the government had to treat you the same. This idea of equal protection by the government was central, and equal opportunity was central to Jackson's theory of government, assuming that you understand that means only whites. Jackson saw himself as waging a war on privilege, and he went after the federal bureaucracy. There were people working in the federal government when Jackson takes office in 1828 who had worked in the Washington administration back in the 1780s. It was very common for somebody to retire from their federal government job and give it to their child as if it was an inheritance. And Jackson wanted to shake these people up. He said that to the victor went the spoils. And what this meant was he claimed the right to fire anyone in the government and replace them with supporters of Jackson. Now, this was a great shock at the time, and a lot of people who had been there for a long time were terrified. But in reality, Jackson only replaces 20%, less than 20% actually, of all the government employees. He ends the caucus system. The caucus system is the idea that the leaders of the parties simply choose the candidate and tell the voters, here's your candidate. And he establishes a convention system where leaders of the parties from all over the country will get together and have a convention. And there they will choose that party's nominee for president. And this isn't quite what we have today, where we vote on who our nominee for president is going to be, but it certainly is more democratic than what had been there before.